we'd like to resume our meeting. Let's start off with our pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Quick announcement. We had an executive session to discuss the DASA appeal and some disciplinary issues. Now we'll resume meeting per the agenda. Can I have a motion to adopt the agenda? Mrs. Hoffman, any second? Mrs. Stevenson, all in favor? Okay. This is a study session. It's designed for the purpose of administrative updates to the board. There are no public comments. Residents may attend the next scheduled business meeting, which is December 10th, and/or contact the board by email at boa@gnet.org. And with any comment or question, all questions come into the Office of the Public Information Officer and are shared with the board and our superintendent as appropriate. Policy questions and concerns are typically addressed by the board president. Operational questions and concerns are typically addressed by the superintendent and our designee. So let's go to superintendent comments, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Preston. So tonight we have several presentations as a part of our study session. And I would like to invite Mrs. Carmen forward. As a part of our character education recognition program, we try to recognize people who using their power of volunteerism, let me put it that way, to make a huge difference in our system in many ways, and even some of our staff members who go well beyond the call of duty to ensure that we're doing wonderful things for our students. And so, Mrs. Carmen.
Thank you very much. If I could have Tracy come up for me, Frazier. And I just also want to note, while Tracy's walking up here, and we're actually going to be recognizing Tracy, I have Heather Green and Christy Drinkwater, who's in the back, and Beth Miles, who ultimately really is responsible for the coordination of the program, of the Bountiful Backpack program. So thank you very much, Tracy, for being here tonight. As I said, tonight we would like to recognize Tracy Frazier for her, for the character education, recipient of the Character Education Award. Reliable, committed, caring. That's how we can describe Tracy. She works in the distribution center with students who are assigned there, and they work for like 4 hours a day when they're in there. She's always thinking ahead, communicating with the key stakeholders so that we can be as effective as possible. She is truly the heartbeat of the program, of the Bountiful Backpack program. Heather has a poster here that we wanted to share with you, so she could just talk a little bit about some of the things that Tracy does and just works all the time at making things as effective and efficient as possible. Heather, do you want to
Tracy,
explain?
I will totally explain, and I'll try to get near the mic. Tracy's not just someone who comes and packs bags. In fact, her job is not to pack bags. Her job is to teach. And for those of you who don't know, Christy and I run a program for students 18 to 21 as they transition from Shenendehowa to adult world who have special needs. So in that, they're out working in the community, and the goal is for them to work in jobs that they can stay in. So if you ever see a student at Panera or Hanford, they've likely come through our program. And we're always open for ideas, so come to us. But sometimes we have students who are new. They might be 16, 17, 18, just haven't had a work experience yet. And Tracy makes the first work experience so loving, and yet with such expectations. She tries to not lift a finger and really tries to teach. And so these are some pictures. I don't think anybody understands that 300 backpacks go out a week. So in the beginning, we used to just pack a couple bags at Arenda, and now we pack 300, and Tracy is in charge of 100% of that packing. And so she has about 7 students come per day, 3 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, and we're sending her all sorts of students. We're not, and as I said, they're the young ones who haven't worked and have no work experience. And this is what she walks into. I'll pass it around. On Wednesdays, when a shipment comes from the food pantry, there's no room to walk. It's not like it comes ready to be bagged. It comes in boxes, and she has to prep a menu. She has to do all of the planning. It's like a teacher planning out what these students will do in order for them to be successful. She lays out, like, she has rubrics and things on the floor, and because most students can't count really successfully. So she's got ways of making that all go down, and that doesn't need to come through Christy or I. We're able to just put the trust in her. And so she's been awesome. And finally, two more things. So this is a picture of pickup day. I don't know if any of you have seen Thursday when the pickups come through that high school west. It's crazy. And those 300 backpacks have to go out. And we have students doing that. And she has not only made it safe, she's on me all the time to make sure we have security there, we have snow removal. She also went out and got vests donated for that day so nobody gets hurt. And they were donated by what company?
Awards by Walsh.
Awards by Walsh. So awesome. And finally, I want you to know that I have students, they are not compensated for this job. We have a partnership with New York State where a lot of students are compensated for jobs that they do in the community. This job is not compensated for. I have students begging to go work for Tracy. And it's just hard labor, and they're just begging to be with her. So I think that just speaks to her such dedication. Oh, and she's going out on, can I say that you're going out for a little medical surgery this Friday? She wrote like books of lesson plans for the person coming in to do what she's going to do. So if you see her sub, which is, who's going to do what you're doing? Jamie, forget her last name, but her kids went to camp with us. Jamie Hanley, the Hanley boys' mom. So that she's going to take over for a couple of weeks while Tracy's out, and I didn't have to write a plan. So pretty awesome.
Thank you.
And I'll leave this. Congratulations, Tracy.
So again, as you can see from what Heather has just presented, Tracy honestly goes above and beyond what her job actually entails, and it's because of your dedication and your commitment to the program that our students receive what they receive every week. So thank you very much for everything you do.
Thank you.
I think it's very hard to outdo both of these comments, both from your colleagues and Mrs. Carmen, but I think it says a lot that your colleagues, your peers, the folks that work with you every day really respect and really admire what you're doing. So we tried to summarize this with this simple certificate of recognition, which I'll read, is awarded to Tracy Frazier for exhibiting outstanding character by cultivating, fostering, and demonstrating the virtues and skills of civic engagement and social responsibility. Signed by Dr. Robinson and myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And before Tracy and Beth, Miles, and the ladies leave, I'm just trying to find a quick email here. So we have a lot of great people who have been doing a lot of great things, and certainly that program couldn't run without people like Tracy and the wonderful young people. And we also have, she doesn't know I was going to do this, and I just thought about it too, that this program takes money. A lot of funding we do. People, it's fundraising, people donations to make sure that this funding is the program is sustainable. And so because we don't want to have a situation where one year we're doing for 300 kids and the next year we don't have money to do for any kids. So we want to be able to anticipate that maybe next year is 350 kids. So it takes money. And so Beth recently shared that working with another Shen parent, submitted a grant application to Duncan Brand's Joy in Childhood Foundation, and as a result of that, $15,000 will be awarded to the Regional Food Bank on behalf of the Shen Backpack Program. So that's the power of the work we talk about. So Beth, I want to say thank you, and the parent who assisted us with that piece of it to make sure that this is an absolute success. So thank you again for that as well. So thank you. That's right. So every time you buy a cup of coffee from Dunkin' Donuts, remember that. So again, thank you very much for the board, and thank you much, Heather and Christy, for what you do for those young people. And it's so funny, just a quick story. I was actually in Hannaford, and one of the young men, he was outside doing I was going to say the buggies, the carts. Um, and he was so excited when he saw me, recognized me. I was kind of like, dude, just relax, you're going to get hit. It was just so amazing, and all people looking like, oh my God. So it was so cool. It was like, those are the moments, to be honest, which I love when you see that just pure joy from a young person who knows that, it's just so, and I was like, yeah, it's just so cool. So it was cooler for me than it was for him, for me to know him. So that was pretty nice. So thank you again for your wonderful work as well. So feel free if you need to leave. You don't have to stay the whole time. We appreciate that. So part of our tradition this time of year as we start, and I'm gonna do, no, we'll keep the same progression. Part of the tradition this time of year, we have, yeah, I am going to switch it around. You don't mind hanging out for a little bit, do you? Josh is good. So good. So perfect. So we're gonna, if you don't mind, go ahead and bump the enrollment forecast down a little bit. And we also have then Mrs. Carmen could come back up. Actually, no, Becky, sit down. We saw you twice in a row. So one of the things that we try to highlight, in the board every year puts on my goals document different areas that they want to see and highlight, different programs, different initiatives, and probably one of the fastest growing programs proportionally in the district is our E&L program. And so we have been doing a lot of work trying to ensure, we talk about service follow needs, to ensure that we have the type of services to address the diverse needs of our students. And so I'm going to have Sarah talk a little bit. But before Sarah present on the NL program, I was just recently in where was it I saw you? Aranjan. I saw her both at Octa and Aranjan with one of our teachers. And I shared this morning in our principal's meeting that I'm assuming you're going to go come up and join Sarah too at some point, all of you? Yes? Okay. So they'll do an introduction at that point. So I shared with, and I think it's important for the board, I shared this morning, I was observing, and while I was observing the NL teacher, though, the thing that struck me was it was an assignment about how do you greet in different languages. And the thing that struck me was when asked kids in the class who speak a different language, who somebody at home or family, otherwise, how many kids actually raised their hands? And so I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting, knowing that not all those kids were in our E&L program, because sometimes we make the assumption, right, that that's the case, but that's not. The second piece that struck me, though, is how rich that experience was for all the kids, because we had the E&L teacher in there doing that particular instruction. And I thought, man, and I said it this morning at our principal's meeting, how can we try to replicate that same type of quality, rich experience for all kids? And I really thought about it. I'm thinking like, wow, every classroom should have this type of experience for all our kids, especially our kids at those young, tender age when they're in elementary school, when we can still kind of mold their minds, right, to a large degree. So we were talking about that. We were talking about how do we look at those practices and play them out in other venues. And so I shared it out not only for the teachers here, but Dr. Wood, I know, has been doing some thinking around it, because that's, I think, what we're talking about. When Mr. DeLallo presented on the issues of diversity and white fragility here, or when board members went to the summit, and when we talk about equity and opportunities and outcomes, whenever we see these good practices, I'm always wrestling, how do we socialize it? How do we see it happen in other places as well, and not just happen to be just because this person, this situation occurred, versus how do we make sure that this is the experience that we have? And we have great practices. You heard one before, and so you're going to hear now some of the work that we're doing with our ENL students, and the goal is not only for that population, the student experience, but how does those actions impact the larger whole, so we truly do have students with a global perspective. So with that note, Sarah, turn over to you.
Are you going to be my clicker, Dr.
Now,
Winfrey?
if I click, I might push you off the stage too fast.
I don't know if I trust myself. Okay. So is there a way to...
Oh,
That one?
aluminum PDF, try the PDF. It might be a little bit better, let's see. No, forget about it. Go
Okay.
right to it.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's
just
fine.
click through it. Just,
That's
you have to
fine.
probably
If I
scroll.
click through, it'll just keep going each slide, right? And
Yeah,
then-
you just have
okay.
to scroll up.
Okay.
Just make sure. No, it's because of how it was saved.
You want to do that for me?
Yeah.
Okay, all right. So first of all, I want to make sure I thank you for having me on the agenda. Dr. Robinson, when I had reached out to him and said I would love to be on the board agenda just to give some updates on ENL, and I asked Dr. Robinson, because it was the first time that I really presented just on my own, how much time I had. Dr. Robinson said, you've got about 10 to 15 minutes. So I said, challenge accepted. There's a lot to talk about with our ENL program. It is a program of tremendous growth. So before I start, I want to make sure that I thanked you for having me here tonight. Also wanted to thank the members of Team ENL who are joining us. They're all sitting in the back, but a lot of them are here. And so if there are any questions later on that I can't answer, we'll call on them to help us out. But also, I wanted to thank Dr. Wood and Dr. Robinson and all of you for your tremendous support of our program. It is very quickly growing, which we'll talk about tonight. So I wanted to make sure before I go any further that I said thank you for that. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight. Shen, ENL by the numbers. We're going to take a look at our growth, how many ELs we have, what buildings they're in. We'll also talk about who they are, where they come from, where their families come from, what different languages they speak, how we identify them. How does the student become an English language learner? How do we determine that they need those support services? How do we teach them? And you'll notice here that we're talking about L's and MELs. So if you hear me switching back and forth between L's and MELs, it's because state ed is now changing L's to MELs. So English language learners are slowly becoming what we call multilingual learners. So I'm trying to get the lingo down. Most of us are just remembering ESL is now ENL.
Yeah.
One of the most common questions I get is, what's an L? What is ENL? There are all these acronyms. And then how do we support teachers of L's and MELs? Not just the 13 teachers we have in our department now, but the 450 teachers in our district who work with L's every day, K-12. So here are some numbers, and in this format, you won't get my fancy formatting, but 415 is the number of English language learners that we currently have at Shen. And our English language learners come from very diverse backgrounds, and they're very diverse learners. We have some English language learners who are multilingual and highly educated. We have others who are what we call SIFEs, or students with interrupted formal education, and are coming to us with 2 or more years where they have not been in a school setting at all. So we have a huge diversity within that 415. I think the most shocking number is the 400% growth that we've seen in our district over the last 10 years, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in detail. Our biggest growth comes in those 3 buildings. High school has had 114% growth over the last 5 years. Chango at 123% growth. And the big winner is Octay at 156% growth over the last 5 years. Octay does not have our largest population of L's, but it's our fastest growing. And 46 is right now at this moment the number of languages that are spoken on our campus by English language learners. So as Dr. Robinson said earlier, we don't really track all of the languages that might be spoken by our non-L's, but there are 46 different languages. So this gives you sort of a visual of the growth of our program over the last 10 years. And so one of the questions that I get a lot is, what has spurred this growth in our district? How is it that we've, escalated our numbers over the last 10 years? And I don't know that we have a definite answer, but one piece of information that I can share with you that I find so interesting is that in 2009, we had 2 students whose families were attached to Global Foundries. And in 2019, at the end of last year, we had 587. So that's probably leading to a huge, that's a huge part of our growth. I also think, and this may just be me personally, I happen to think that we have one of the strongest, if not the strongest programs in the area. We have an amazing team of teachers, and frankly, I think the word is out. I think this is the place to come if you are looking for a district that supports diverse learners and diverse students and diverse languages. So this gives you an idea of where our L's are in the district. So by building, you can see that Oranjan has the most L's in their building. Oranjan is not the fastest growing. They've actually had more L's than other buildings for quite a while now. Again, Octet is probably the fastest growing. This is talking about just our department. So this is just to give you an idea of the growth of the folks in our department. We currently have 13 ENL teachers. We have 6 part-time ENL teachers and 7 full-time ENL teachers, and our part-time teachers often do double or triple duty. We have Latin teachers who are ENL teachers. We have English teachers who are ENL teachers. We have German teachers who are ENL teachers. So there are 13 of us all together now. And then this will give you a really good idea of just the diversity of the languages that our kiddos speak. This is pretty impressive. So New York State, just to give you a frame of reference, New York State has about 250,000 L's. It's the 4th largest population of L's in the country. So it's a pretty good sized population. And of that 250,000 L's, 65% of them are Spanish speaking. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of what it looks like across the state. But if we go to the next slide, you'll see that that is actually not the most popular language spoken on our campus. The most popular language among our L's is Chinese. And another really interesting fact is that Chinese is clearly, the most widely spoken language among our L's and their families. Now, Portuguese is interesting because last year at this time, Portuguese wasn't even in the top 6. And so we started seeing lots of screenings of students that were Portuguese speaking. And so we suspected that it would work its way into the top 5, and sure enough it has. So not only did Portuguese work itself into the top 5, but it's quickly about to surpass Spanish. And it's actually the 3rd most widely spoken language among our L's. So that is a very quickly growing population. And this is just a visual to give you an idea of really how incredibly diverse our ENL families are and where they come from. So when you see that and you imagine how much richness that brings to all of our students, that's pretty impressive. So how do we know a student is an L? We said we would explain that. I'm going to give you Crash Course 101. There are 4 steps to that. The very first thing is a home language questionnaire, and that home language questionnaire is something that all parents fill out when they register a child in a New York State school. And so the home language questionnaire has this series of questions, such as what language do mom and dad speak at home? What language do the siblings speak? What was the first language your child spoke? If a language other than English is indicated in any of those questions, that triggers an informal interview. So the informal interview is the first time that a student and parents come and meet with an ENL teacher. There's a series of questions that we ask, and really the informal interview is sort of a check on the HLQ to kind of confirm that yes, another language is present in the home, and the child might potentially be an English language learner. And so the New York State Identification Test for English Language Learners, more commonly referred to as the NICETEL, is the next step after that. And that's a formal assessment that helps us determine A, if the child is an L, and B, at what level their English proficiency is, because that's going to then determine services. And then the New York State English as a Second Language Achievement Test, the NICESLAT, that's the test that's given every spring to our English language learners to determine where they are in their progress, what level of English they speak. And the easiest way to remember that, is that the NICETEL tells us if a child is an L, and the NICESLAT tells us, excuse the very poor dangling preposition, tells us where they're at. So this gives you an idea of our Shen-Ls, where they fall in terms of their language proficiency. You'll notice that the largest group of L's are in that expanding category. That expanding category is the second to last category before they reach commanding. Once they reach commanding, we say that they've tested out. So when a student tests out, though, we are still required to offer them 2 years of services after that. And after those 2 years, they become what we call ever L's. The idea being that once you're an L, you're always an L, right? At the federal level, you might hear ever LEP. They sometimes refer to them as ever LEPs. But that large expanding group is pretty typical. That tends to be a proficiency level where students will linger a little bit before they hit commanding. Okay, so E&L program goals. So there are a lot of things that we do, but there are really two main goals. One is to make content accessible to students who don't speak English or are still learning English. So that means social studies, math, science. The other thing that our E&L teachers do is they teach English, right? That they teach students the skills to learn English. So there are two ways we do that. One is through standalone and one is through integrated. So standalone is an E&L teacher working with English language learners in a classroom. There is a curriculum for that. And that is sort of where students are learning their English skills. And then integrated is where you have an E&L teacher and a content area teacher co-teaching together the same curriculum that all other students have, except that it's modified in a way that makes it accessible to ELs. And what's interesting is that you'll notice that the standalone is only for students at the entering and emerging level. Those are the two beginning levels. After that, where they receive their E&L instruction is in the integrated classroom with their peers and with an E&L teacher and a non-E&L teacher. We do have a couple of folks in our department who are duly certified, meaning that they are E&L certified but also content area specialists, and they kind of can serve as one person teaching that class. So sometimes we see that too. So how do we support teachers of ELs? Because again, there are 450 or so of them that are working with our English language learners every single day, K-12. This is just a list to give you an idea of some of the things that we're doing this year. We've offered more than 50 different types of professional development in the last 2 years on our campus. And I want to just really praise building principals who've reached out to me and have said, you know, can we do something at our faculty meeting? Can we do something at a department meeting? Almost every content area academic administrator has worked in faculty meetings and doing professional development specific to their content area and working with ELs. So there's been a tremendous amount of learning going on there. So what's next? So in no particular order, these are some of the things that we sort of have in the works. Some of them you may have heard about already. The name project is something that's happening right now. What we're looking to do is we're looking to record students and or parents, depending on the age of the student, saying their name correctly. It's then attached to Infinite Campus so teachers can access the correct pronunciation of a student's name. We know that there's a ton of research about the importance of pronouncing students' names correctly, and it's the thing that we hear over and over and over again from our English language learners that they wish their teachers did, was pronounce their names correctly. So we have a plan for that. I'm proud to say that if I'm not mistaken, Chango students have almost all been recorded already. So this is an ongoing plan this year. I think Sasago's a close second. The E&L program review is something that Greg Pace has agreed to work with me on. For the E&L program review, what that is the Regional Bilingual Education Resource Network, which we commonly refer to as the RBERN. We partner with them on a lot of things at Shen. We do a lot of professional development and teacher support with them. One of the things that they do is they go into districts who have been flagged in ESSA as having deficiencies in their E&L programming. We do not have any flags. I promise you that. But what we want to do is we've sort of volunteered for this because we want to take what we're already doing and we want to do it even better. So Greg Pace has agreed to partner with me on this and do a trial run at Sasago. And the E&L Family School Partnership, that's something that Joe Florio is partnering with me on. It's a way to connect E&L families to Shen, sort of like a PTA or a PTO, if you will, but something specific for E&L families. We're starting that at the elementary level, starting out sort of small. Seal of Biliteracy is something that you may have heard from the world language side of things because it's something that impacts students who are learning world languages, who are non-ELs, who already speak English. But it also involves English language learners. So the Seal of Biliteracy is a designation on a student's diploma that indicates that they're biliterate, so that they're literate in more than one language, sometimes in some cases multiple languages. That is a program that we spent a year last year building, and we're implementing it for the first time this year. But it impacts students who are learning a world language, and it also impacts English language learners who already speak another home language. Bilingual student and parent volunteers. This is something we launched in the last couple of weeks. Pretty simply, we reached out to families and to see if there were students and parents who might be interested in helping us out with interpretation and translation. There are lots of things that they can help with that are not necessarily sensitive, but I can tell you, and Dr. Wood can attest to this, that interpretation and translation services are very expensive, and there's a lot of need for them. So we thought, why don't we tap into folks in our community and our families, and also our own students. So as of right now, I think there are 25 parents who have reached out to us, many of them speaking lower incidence languages that are very hard to find interpreters for. And we have almost 80 students in just the high school who reached out and said, I'm happy to help escort a student around, help them get used to school, introduce them to their teachers, whatever helps, because we have that many students who are able to do that. And then the E&L profiles is not something brand new. It's something we implemented a couple of years ago. And if you want to scroll up, this is an example of an E&L student profile. E&L student profiles are sort of our answer to an IEP. There is no document that exists that captures the needs of English language learners, partly because their needs change pretty rapidly. And so what we launched a couple of years ago was the creation of these profiles, and the profiles are available to every teacher of every English language learner. What's really neat this year is that we figured out a way, with the help of Holly Green, to attach them in Infinite Canvas so teachers can access them really quickly, and it helps you understand, what are the modifications the child needs in the classroom. Do the parents need an interpreter when you communicate with them, all kinds of stuff. Questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I saw that there's a 114% increase of high school. Coming in as an English language learner, especially emerging, at those early stages, so do they need more time in high school? They need some extra.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, great
All right,
question.
yeah.
So I won't bore you with all the details, but we have sort of two tables that we look at. If you're a K-8 student, the number of minutes you need as an entering or emerging student is different than if you are a 9-12 student. So if you're coming in as a freshman, especially as an entering level freshman, you have a significantly larger number of minutes or time that you need in order to learn English, because we have to get them ready for Regents exams.
Right.
So it's super challenging. It is. Yeah.
What is the percentage of that group that is able to get? Not sure. We have about 10 years worth of data.
Yeah.
But the increase is, I'm not sure if it's been in the last year, but of those kids, do you have a high percentage that do get their Regents diploma?
Patrice, you want to? So Patrice Delahanty is here. Patrice is our 9-12 teacher.
We'll get that data for you.
Yeah. We do find that there are certain content areas that are more challenging than other content areas, and certain Regents exams in particular that can be really challenging, like global, right? Can be.
Right, yes.
So, yeah, thanks, Patrice.
It's a lot of
Yeah,
information.
but we can certainly find out more detail for you.
After a student has tested out and gone through the additional 2 years of support, they get to the point where they're taking SATs. Okay. If it was a simple thing, we could say, well, if they've done very well on that, that means that our program was sufficiently successful so that they weren't hindered by the fact that they started speaking and working with language later on. I suspect, however, that a lot of our students are coming from highly educated, extremely intelligent parents that may have a lot more to do with it than anything else. But is there any evidence that to to support the idea that they really have prospered under the efforts here and are succeeding as a consequence. In other words, they're very competitive on the SAT verbal section and so forth.
Yeah, so we have, and again, I would defer to my colleagues in the department if they want to, I see Patrice nodding. Is there something you wanted to add? No. Okay. And one of the things, just to kind of follow up to what you said, one of the things that you'll hear all of us say pretty regularly is when students come to us with a home language, a lot of parents, K-12, we hear this, say, I'm working, teaching them English at home, and I'm practicing with them at home, and we are constantly saying that the more literate a student is in their home language, the more literate they're going to be in English. So we're always encouraging families. In fact, some of the families that you mentioned too, some of our very literate, highly educated students, we still encourage that home language continue to be spoken because it only helps them on things like the SAT.
I have one more question. And actually, this made me think of this. So do they tutor? Because since they're strong in Chinese, for example, do they tutor other Shen students that are taking Chinese as now a second language?
Yes, they absolutely could. We don't have a formal program for tutoring. I think with sort of a ad hoc, we reach out to students that can help other students. The most formal thing we've done is, in recent weeks, sort of asking about, students working as interpreters. But one of the questions that we asked on that survey to gather those names was, are you willing to tutor a student in Spanish, French, German? So a lot of our students who are L's speak languages that we don't teach on our campus. So that's the catch, yeah.
Thanks, Sarah. Nice job.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks.
So on that note, we'll continue with another program update, and then we'll end with enrollment and then an overview of the budget. Mrs. Carmer, come forward. We have like most things here, Shen, convention of our size is that we do things in probably significantly larger scale and scope than many places, and certainly our community education and community services program is one of those examples, so we provide an overview of that. Do you want to scroll?
Thank you. You can do it. That's fine. Before I get started, Jill Glarno is here from the Community Services Department supporting, and she's really the backbone behind a lot of this work that happens in community services. So to start off, I'll talk a little bit about community education first. We currently have Julie, who is my assistant, but also we have Kim Pottenberg, who are in community education. And they are really responsible for putting this program together. And we offer a variety of courses for the community, and driver education is a part of community education. We vet it through that program. Courses are continually being updated based on information that we're receiving from participants or based on interest in the community. We use data that we have, enrollment data, various surveys that are given by different instructors. And at different times, I know Kim and Julie put surveys out to see if there's an interest for particular classes that we're not offering. And we continue to get requests from the community with really diverse requests of different classes that are out there, and we are excited about offering the program options that we offer. If you look at community services, We have use of facilities, which is really coordinated through the Community Services Office. The district continues to value those partnerships that we have with the community, and that we're continuously looking at how we partner and what are those things that we can offer within our district for different clubs, groups, or organizations that are out there that are looking for space. Our services continue to grow as the needs of the community grow. And as you can see here from, actually the next slide, you can see some of the data that really is kind of alarming when you look at the numbers. But when you look at 2004, we had 9,884 scheduled events. And now, we're looking at a tremendous amount of events that we're offering, and the amount of programs that, we over, 24, I'm just trying to look, 29, there you go. And we, community services started back in 1996, and it was very small, and we just continue to expand as the needs and the demands of the community continue to expand. We've tripled since 2004. This department is really responsible for ensuring that the use of facilities policy is adhered to, that who we're renting to is in alignment with our policy and in compliance with that, and also ensuring that school safety is adhered to, as well as maintenance of order on school property. The program itself was exposed for the first time to our flip charts this year, the emergency flip charts. So Amy did some education around that regarding, she has an annual meeting every year with the use of facilities people, and she talked about those flip charts and how they're around, and how they can use them when they're in the buildings. The last piece is the Friends of Shen volunteer program, which is also run through the Community Services Department, and that's been an expansion. We expanded that program a few years back, and really this is really about a volunteer program that's different from your volunteers, your parent volunteers in the school. This program recruits, screens, and places volunteers from the community and from higher education into our schools. And currently, Scano is one of the buildings who really utilizes a lot of these volunteers. We have some every once in a while in other buildings. They may be reading, they may be participating in specific programs that they're having, but I know that Mrs. Florio utilizes the volunteers that we have from some of those higher education facilities. And that's a very brief overview about community education and community services.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Part of our ritual that as we start a budget process is to do enrollment forecasting. And so I met Josh tonight for the first time. I'm sure Josh will introduce himself here in a second to let us know better who he is. And then we'll go through the process. So I think your presentation is here, right?
Yeah, it should be
Is this it?
from the bottom. Report.
Where?
This is the report itself. It should be like on the bottom there, in the tab.
Here. Oh, here. This, you mean?
Yep.
This is yours?
Yep.
Okay. Beautiful. Okay, so you want to click it on?
Thanks. I just want to apologize in advance. I'm a little sick, so if you see me drinking
Thanks.
water.
Can I get them?
And if anyone wants, I have extra copies of the actual report in the box. So I'm just going to be going through what's in the report. So if anyone wants to take a look at the report, did everyone here get one? Just put it on the tables. So they're in that box if anyone. And there's a lot of extra data and stuff in here. So my name is Josh Tossi. I work for the Capital District Regional Planning Commission. We're an entity that works with municipalities, school districts in the region to do a whole bunch of different stuff. We've been doing school enrollment projections for, I think, since the 90s now. So we've done a whole lot of them all across the region. We work a lot with mapping and census data. So a lot of publicly available data we work with and use to benefit the region in planning or whatever else they may need. So this is just kind of the outline of what I'm going to go through tonight. We're going to start with looking at what we projected the enrollment for this year to be and what it actually was. I'm going to talk a little bit about why that was and then get into it later. And then we'll go through enrollment trends for the past 20 years. We have data since, I think, 1980, so we have a lot of historical data for enrollment in the region or in the school district. We're just going to go through the past 20 years. Then we're going to talk about trends in the birth rates within the school district. We're going to talk about housing data and development of housing over time. And then we're going to get into the actual projections. We project 5 years out, so it'll be through 2025. Let me just get my thing together here. My staple came out. That's okay. So before I begin, I'm going to be talking a lot about survival ratios, and I just want to explain what those are before we begin, so it makes more sense. So basically, a survival ratio is the number of students that went from one grade this year and that was in the next grade next year. So if there was 100 students in second grade this year and next year there was 105, they have a positive survival ratio because they grew. If it went from 100 to 95, it would be below 1. So it's a percentage that shows how many students are moving from grade to grade as the years go on. So we do that for grades 1 through 12, and then we have another one for kindergarten. Because there's no grade really before kindergarten, we have to go from the birth class. So we look at how many kids were born in the district 5 years prior, and then we use that number and how many kids were enrolled in kindergarten to make a survival ratio that way. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah.
We've seen this rodeo a couple times.
Yeah.
Let's get expanded down.
Yeah, I just want to make sure so I don't lose anybody. So this is a look at enrollment this year and what we projected. So if you look in that first column on the left, 2019-20, that's the actual enrollment, and then the column next to it projected is what we had projected in the previous report that we did last year. And as you can see, there was a little bit of variation. There was fewer students enrolled than we anticipated. And one of the biggest differences, if you look, was the kindergarten class. So we anticipated 600 students enrolled, and there was only 518. And that's the lowest kindergarten enrollment that there's been in the district in the past 20 years. So that was a really big shock because the birth class that we were using for this was 2014, and it was 702 students, which was really, really big. It's the biggest in the past few years. So we expected a big class, and there was a lot smaller than normal. It was almost 100 students, so that was one of the biggest differences. Second grade and fourth grade, you can also see there's a little bit difference. There was lower survival ratios than we anticipated. And mostly, 10th grade, usually 10th grade we see losses historically, and this year there was a gain, so that's a good sign, but a little different. And if you look at the graph or the chart on the right, usually we break down enrollment by single grades and then grade cohorts. So K through 5 is the elementary school kids, 6 to 8 is middle school, and then 9 to 12 would be high school. So we break it down that way. And as you can see, we were off by 1.7%, so we overestimated a little bit. But we tried to be within 2% for all of our projections, so we account for any variation. So this is a look at the past 20 years of enrollment. As you can see, starting in 2000, it was at a low of 9,042, and it grew steadily throughout 2008, 2009, where it hit a peak of 9,869 students. And then it was, a little decline, but pretty much stable for a while until 2017, 2018. It began to decline. There's been 2 back-to-back years of decline. And the current enrollment was 9,536. Can everyone see that? I know it's probably a little small.
You have it here too.
Yeah, it's in the the reports too, if anyone wants to take a closer look. So this is a look at the past 20 years of just kindergarten enrollment. Kindergarten enrollment is really important because it feeds the rest of the district. So kindergarten and K through 5, we kind of look as indicators of what's going to come. So over the next 13 years of a student's career, this feeds into it. So if there's a really big kindergarten class, that's a good sign because that class will likely grow as it goes on and will show good enrollment, or if it's a smaller class, it might bring enrollment down. So as you can see, In 2005, 2006, there was a high of 752 kids, and then it's been declining ever since. The most previous low was 533 in 2012, 2013, and then this year was the lowest of the past 20 years at 518 students. So this is a look at the kindergarten through 5th grade cohort. That black line, it's a little hard to see the colors, but the higher line on this side is overall enrollment, so you can see how K through 5 enrollment affects that enrollment. So as you can see, total enrollment was low, and then there was consistent years of growth in K through 5, and as that grew and as those students moved through the system, total enrollment began to grow until they both hit a high in 2008, 2009. And then, as you can see, K through 5 began to decrease, and total enrollment was stable. That's mostly because as the K through 5 classes got smaller and smaller, the students from before were still moving through, but once those students graduate or leave, then there's fewer students feeding into it, so it's bringing down the cohort, bringing down the total enrollment. So that's why K through 5 is so important, because you can see how it affects and how it feeds the rest of the cohorts. And this year, K through 5 was at its lowest the past 20 years. So you can see it started in 2001 at 4,060, and this year it was at 4,041. So it's back to those levels that it was in the beginning of the decade. 2 decades. So this is 6 through 8 cohort. 6 through 8, pretty much for every school district, varies a lot. There's a lot of random kind of ups and downs in it. It's a little hard to predict because you never really know what it's going to do. But as you can see, it kind of goes along the same lines as total enrollment. It started, hit a low in 2002, 2003 of 2,131 students. Hit a high in 2013, 2014 of 2,453. And if you remember, the high for K through 5 was in 2008. And then 5 years later, we can see that 6 through 8 saw its high, so those students moved through, and then they got their high in 2013. And now it's back down to 2,189 for the current year. And then 9 through 12, it's been growing pretty consistently over the years because it's been being fed by the lower cohorts for 13 years. So declines in the K through 5 cohort won't be seen in this cohort for a while. So if there was a lot of students coming in through K through 5, it'll later on over the next 10 to 12 years, we'll start moving into this cohort. So declines in the lower cohorts won't be seen in this one until later on. It started at a low of 2,746 students in 2000. Last year was the high of enrollment, 2018, 2019, with 3,222. And then there was a slight decline this year, but when you hit a 20-year high, there's always going to be a slight decline. So it's declined down to 3,166. So this is the birth data. The Department of Health in 2002 started releasing birth data by school district. So for any school district in the state, you can see how many students were born in that district. It's 2 years behind, so as you can see, these two bars in the 2018, 2019 are a different color because we estimated them. So we don't know how many kids were born in the district in those 2 years yet. We won't know until next year. We'll know for 2018. But we usually take an average of the past 5 years and use that to calculate what we estimate. And so that goes into the projections. So in next year, you might find out that in 2018 there was 700 births, so that would bring up a kindergarten projection in next year's, or if it was lower, it would bring it down. As you can see, 2014, that's the really high birth class that I was talking about, 702. It's the highest that the district has seen since 2005. So we expected a really big kindergarten enrollment class. There's usually a pretty decent kindergarten survival ratio in the district, but for whatever reason, this year's enrollment is low. And now we're going to look at some housing data throughout the district to kind of give a sense of what is happening outside of just enrollment. So we don't know for sure who moves into houses when they're sold or when they're built. We don't know if it's families with kids. We don't know who it is, but we can kind of look and then see how that might affect enrollment moving forward. So as you can see, in the school district, we are currently at 28,099 total housing units. It's the highest it's been ever, and it's grown consistently, and you can see that in the enrollment in the past. As enrollment has grown and more housing units, you can assume that families with young kids or new families were moving in and settling down, and their kids were starting to go into the school district. If I'm talking too fast, or if anyone has any questions, please feel free to stop me at any point. So we were asked by the district to take a special look at two areas. So it's a little hard to see, but in the top right there in Malta, you can see one red cloud. That's area 1. And then in the bottom left, or in the middle there, that's area 2 in Clifton Park. We were asked to take a look at those two areas to see if there was any special development going on or anything that we noticed that was happening. In area 1 up there was only one single-family subdivision recently constructed, and that's Maple Forest. A single-family subdivision is basically like an area of houses that are made for one family, so they're detached buildings, so it's just one standard house that's built for one family. So that was the only real development we saw going on there. In 2010, the population, we looked at the census tracts in the area. Now, the census tracts don't exactly fit into the area that we were asked to look at, but it's pretty close. As you can see, NE01 and NE02 were the two areas that we were looking at, and the census tracts kind of fell into those, and a little bit of the area to the right. So the census tract isn't perfectly that area, but it gives a sense of growth in the areas. So in 2010, in the census tracts we looked at, there was 9,020 people living there, and then in 2017, there was approximately a population of 10,173. So there was standard growth, over a 7-year period. And then housing units, we had 3,239 in 2000, and then in 2010, we had 3,910. And then in 2020, when the census is complete, we can take a look again to see how many housing units, an exact count of housing units in the next census. And then in Area 2, there is approximately 15 single-family units that have been approved by the town board. So not a huge amount, but there's a lot of development in Clifton Park overall.
Yeah, I zoomed in on that one because I was curious, because that's actually our backyard. And so I don't know what the census tracts are. That's not clear there. But when I saw 15 single-family units, I thought there's no way. But I think it's because you're far enough over.
Yeah.
Because there's Honey Hollow, there's all these developments that are right there that are happening. Definitely more than 15 single-family homes.
Yeah.
So I think it's right where the line was drawn.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
it can be a little bit misleading.
Yeah. So these two census tracts.
It's further out. It's further west
Yeah.
on 146.
Yep. These two census tracts, it's kind of hard to see, but they basically are these 3 purple areas. That's one census tract, and then the second census tract is this entire where it says Arenda. It's hard to see, but it's that one matches.
Right. And if you zoom in on it, you can see that it's like left of Miller. It's or Tanner Road. It's west of Tanner.
Yeah.
And so it's excluding all that development that's happening right there.
Yep. Yeah.
But anyway, just an observation. But I don't even know. I don't know how you. It'd be nice to overlay the census tract so you know exactly what you're looking at.
Yeah.
But just
Yeah,
an
I can send over
observation.
a map of the census tracts. Yeah, but most of because I went through and checked where each development was being built, and most of them were elsewhere in Clifton Park, and mostly like to the right and above.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of development in Clifton Park. We're gonna look at the building permits, but it's a lot. But yeah, so and just in the census tracts we were looking at, there was only about 15 single-family units that were approved. In 2010, there was a population of 9,205, and in 2017, a population of 8,924. So it went down a little bit, but the 2017 population is just an estimate. There's a margin of error, so It could be, I think it's about 300, so it could be about 300 more, 300 less. We won't have an exact number until the 2020 census. So hopefully for next year's projections, we'll have all that data. And then in 2000, there was about 2,402 housing units, and in 2010, there was about 3,450. So that's a significant increase in housing units. The developments I were looking at were in the past like 2 or 3 years that were approved. So there's former, there's probably older subdivisions that have been built there in that time. So we took a look at existing home sales. So we're going to look at new construction later, but this was a look at homes that already exist and people, how much are being sold. So in the farthest bar, 2019, that's only through October 31st. And as you can see, it's almost to last year's total, which was a record high in the past 5 years. And the number of units sold is that black line, so that kind of shows how many. Oh, I'm sorry, the green bars are the cost, the average cost, the median sales cost of the existing homes, and the black bar is the number of units sold. So as you can see, it's already higher than any other year, and it's only been 10 months. I think on average, this year it's about 10 homes a month, so we can estimate that there might be around, 100 homes. So it might be around 1,200, and the next 2 months we'll see. But next year, in next year's projections, we'll have final data for this year, so we can see how much higher it was. But a lot more units sold, and the median sales price went down, so it made it a little bit more affordable. And that shows a lot of interest in the district, so people want to move here. A higher median sales price usually means that more people are trying to get in, so the price goes up. It went down a little bit, but it's still significantly higher than it has been over the past few years. So it shows a lot of interest. So people are trying to move into the district. We don't know who's moving in. We don't know if it's families or if it's whoever it may be. But there is significant interest in the district. So this is our grade-to-grade projections. So this first column is the current year, 2019-2020. And then as we go to the right, it shows what we project the enrollment to be over the next few years.
So just sticking with this, you showed how this year is actually 518, and then that would be next year's first graders, and that's almost a 20% jump.
Yeah. So
But normally it's not that big of a jump. So what do you think it'll be that way?
So historically, because I noticed that as well, and I was like, that's weird. Why is there 100, almost more than 100 student increase, or about 100 or 100? I don't know. I'm not sure why. I haven't really got I can talk to Bob Millia about it. But every year, in every historical data that we have since 1980, there's usually about 100 student jump between kindergarten and first grade.
It's the half Victoria.
Yeah, that's
what happened. We anticipate
Well,
that.
so I was just wondering, because they adjusted, did it take into account because your initial projection was so much higher, so I didn't know if it was adjusted for the lower than expected start.
Yep. Yes.
And then as you go down, they usually do go up, all the grades, which is interesting,
Yeah.
except for 2 grades. And I want to say 10th graders going into 11th grade and 11th graders, there's 2 years where it goes down. Everything else goes up. And so in one of your observations in the report, you say, even though there's some spikes, like in 2014, you still expect the trends to go down, but at an accelerated rate. And is it because of the assumptions that there is growth from year to year? Is that what's driving that accelerated? When you go back and you revise the numbers based on actual, is that driving the acceleration? Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing with the acceleration is the kindergarten, because it's so important. So historically, there's always been growth. Shen has had really good growth from grade to grade, except usually I think historically 10th grade and 11th grade, there's decreases. But I think the biggest thing, there's other factors too, but I think the biggest thing is the projected lower kindergarten classes. So if you look, 518 was the lowest of the past 20 years, and next year's projected is 447. So that just continuously brings down enrollment overall, and it won't be immediately, but over 5 years, then the K through 5 cohort grows down, and then the other cohorts goes down. So I think that's the biggest thing. But for this projection, I I increased the survival ratios a little bit. When we do this, we have 4 different survival ratios. We have year-to-year, 5-year, 10-year, and 20-year. So we usually take the mid-range of those and then try to, based on historical trends, kind of adjust to which one we think is the most accurate, what's going to happen. Most of the survival ratios are above 1. They're usually like 1.08 or 1.06, something like that. So slow growth over time. But for this year, so for the kindergarten ones, because we don't have 20-year ones or 5-year ones, we have to use the year-to-year. When we do the projections out for kindergarten, we have to use the current year survival ratio. And because this year's was so low, it's bringing it down, right? So that's why I tried to use higher survival ratios for some of the other grades, because I don't think that kindergarten will always be this low. If you have a 20-year low survival ratio, I don't think that's going to be the norm moving forward. This year's kindergarten survival ratio was about 0.706, I want to say, and usually it's about 0.89 or something like that. So it's pretty significant. So I tried to adjust for that, and I think we're going to see the projections a little later, but I think they're not going to be as accelerated as this shows. But that's why these kindergarten ones are so low, and I think that's what brings the projections down. But next year, 2015's birth class was 606, which was the lowest in the past since 2002, I believe. So I think next year's is definitely going to be a small, especially if enrollment is the same as it has been this year. If that happens again, it could be a really small one, which is what it's showing here. But that's why. Yeah, I know it's like a long-winded answer, but
No, in a nutshell, you adjusted the others because you think that this is an anomaly,
yeah.
essentially.
Yeah.
Okay.
So a little bit, it's not usually the 4 survival ratios that we generate aren't crazy far from each other. So it's not like it was, like 0.10 or 0.20 percentage points higher than the other ones. It's usually like 0.03 or 0.04. But that was the methodology we used behind that. So as you see, I don't know if you can all see it, but on this bottom row, the total for this year was 9,536 students, and we're projecting that in 2024-25, it would be 8,789. So that would be the lowest, I believe, in the past 20 years for this projection. But again, keep in mind that most likely won't be that low. It will probably be a little bit higher, but projections are projecting acceleration of declines. So it will definitely be faster than what we thought last year, but it may not be. It may be that fast, but it might not be that fast. So this is just a look at the total projections. So on the left here where it's green, that's historic, and then the black moving right is projected. So as you can see, in 2010, 2011, enrollment was 9,833. Has now moved down to 9,536, and we're projecting down to 8,789. In some of our older projections, we kind of saw it looked like that enrollment was going to continue to grow, but we kind of predicted that it would start to decline, and that ended up happening. We predicted at a slower rate, but now that's so this is taking a look at the K through 5 projections. So it started off 2010, 2011 at 4,396. Current year is 4,041, and we're projecting it to decline down to 3,507. So a pretty significant decline over the next 5 years, and that will, as we talked about before, have effects cascading up over the next decade after that. So something to look out for.
Oh, you mean ticking back up after 2004, 2005? Yes? Is that what you're saying?
No, so like the...
Right, I see it's going down, but you're saying that the longer term, you see it ticking back up?
No.
No.
I think it would like cascade, like in like the next decade it would be, if it is this low, then the other ones would see that decline as these students move through.
I'm just curious, Dr. Robinson, do we have, I know it's not covered here, but a number for children in the school district, and we track them because they ride the buses usually, or well, the district keeps track of them. And so I was just curious, how many students are in the school district? Because it also gives us a sense, you know, if they're not here, they're in private schools or
Oh,
homeschool.
okay, yeah, we do,
Yeah.
we know.
And do you know what that number is?
We probably have about 1,000 kids going to private parochial schools,
Okay.
and then another 200 kids in homeschool. So, do the math, probably a little over 10,000 kids could be in district, 11,000.
Is it growing? Well, it seems like
No,
it might be
it's
growing.
been pretty stable
Okay.
for the most part. I mean, district overall enrollment's been pretty stable, because when we had the highs, we had lows coming in, so it's been stabilized over the years.
Yeah, I was just trying to figure out why it is dropping when house sales are going up. They're still,
Well, I mean, you have a lot of people buying big old houses with no kids.
right. Well,
I mean-
also in your report, you said that in multifamily, there's a lot of multifamily
And we have more and more
and
empty
they have
nesters
they have fewer kids.
than ever
Yeah,
So-
as well.
typically, yeah, that's like,
And more
And
efficient.
more and more empty nesters. I mean, you have
Yeah, but
neighborhoods.
those aren't the new sales.
Well, no, not people staying. I think if you see probably one of the larger growing population are in fact people without kids that stay in the district in their 4 or 5 bedroom homes after the kids. Because one, I mean, it's a great place. A lot of amenities. It's close and it's quality community, and contrary to people still live south one certain period of time and they still come back north for other period of time, but they're still holding on to their houses.
Yeah.
yeah. I mentioned in the report, I mentioned the empty nester. I put some census data in there about the average age growing in the town. I can't pull it out the top of my head, but it's in there somewhere about empty nesters. And there's so many housing units in the district, like it was 28,000, I think, approximately. And then if you have 1,200 in the year, it's a lot, but there's still so many housing units in the district overall. So it's just like a small percentage, but yeah. So that's the K side. So 6 through 8, we can kind of see how much it's varied. This is the only cohort projected to grow, and I think that's because of previous larger kindergarten K through 5 classes that will be moving through. So this one is projected to grow a little bit over the next 5 years. As you can see, it's at 2,189 currently, and then by 2024, we're anticipating about 2,253 students enrolled in that cohort. But that growth will probably, if K through 5 were to decline after these 5 years, begin to decline with smaller K through 5 classes coming in. And this is the 9 through 12. Grew pretty consistently through 2018, 2019. Last year was the highest enrollment of the past 20 years, with 3,222 students enrolled. That has declined to 3,166 in the current year, and then we project that going down to about 2,889. Even though the 6 through 8, so those students won't move into 9 through 12 fully within these 5 years. After that 5 years, you might see a little bit of growth because that cohort grew a little bit. It probably won't be super significant growth, but probably will bump it up a little bit, and then it will continue to go down in K through 5 as well. So this is a comparison of our past 3 projections. So as you can see, the top one is 2017, the middle one is 2018, and the bottom one is the current one, 2019. So as you can see, with 2017, we kind of predicted a slight decline coming based on, birth classes and spiral ratios talked about. And then 2018, the declines accelerated a little bit, and then this year they accelerated even more. It's likely that usually actual enrollment is like an aggregate of the 3, so it'll probably be a little bit higher than the current year's projections. You can anticipate around not quite as accelerated, but still accelerating faster than previously thought. Yes. So does anyone have any questions about anything I talked about? I can go back, explain anything. I know it's a lot of data and numbers I'm throwing at you. It can be complicated, but declines are not, this isn't exclusive to Shen. We do currently, I think, 6 districts we do projections for, and everywhere is declining. This generation of kids is just smaller than the last one, just fewer kids coming in, so it's everyone is seeing it happen. So it's not, it's common.
Okay, appreciate it.
Thank
you,
you.
Josh.
Thank you, Josh.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Thank you.
Sorry if I
No,
got my jobs on it. If anyone wants to, I'll stick around if anyone wants a report. They'll be in those boxes. Or if they have any more questions, I can.
Yeah, if you give Vanessa, we'll make sure we distribute them out. Or actually, give them to Kathy right there. So, again, thank you, Mr. Delano.
I just want to make a comment based on, this is not a question. The big question, however, in my mind is, we're not seeing a significant economic downturn. It oftentimes drives population reduction. We aren't seeing a sudden increase in the cost of energy that makes people reluctant to commute greater distances, making us less attractive. There hasn't been a sudden change in our tax rate that would drive people away. All of those things are pretty constant. So it does, make me wonder. Obviously, there's deferred family bearing, and when you defer the family bearing, there's a lower rate of fertility, fewer kids born per family. So, yeah, okay, I understand all of that, but quite frankly, all of those things that have always been a plus factor here, I don't see have changed. We didn't have a nuclear meltdown, that made the place uninhabitable all of a sudden, or anything like that. But dealing with this, I would like to throw out an idea, a thought. We have 8 buildings, 6 grade levels per building. So any change in numbers that we're talking about, and that's obviously elementary school I'm talking about, is spread over a lot of sections, a lot of buildings. But they do occur in all of those buildings. I've never been a proponent of all-day kindergarten. And the reason was because it required a substantial investment in additional faculty, additional classrooms, and so forth. However, right now, we have an enrollment of 518 and a projected loss of elementary enrollment over the next 4 or 5 years of 534. It's not a one-to-one proposition, but it seems to me that potentially we have the ability to reallocate faculty for teaching more sections. We have the ability to repurpose classrooms. Now, obviously, this isn't going to happen all at once, so we couldn't make the change all at once either. However, it happens over a period of time. Just thinking out loud, and I know that's dangerous probably under the circumstance, but just thinking out loud, I'm saying to myself, okay, we can't really go to full-day kindergarten in every building for every section, but conceivably we could add 1 or 2 a year over that period of time until they all were in place. Now, that obviously says, oh, well, wait, I want my kid in all-day kindergarten as opposed to half-day or extended day. The lottery system is used when there's an oversubscription in charter schools. It advantages and disadvantages every family equally. It's mathematically democratic. So that would be one mechanism by which we could do this. And so I'm suggesting that in light of this, we take a more serious look at that possibility. Most people you ask will tell you a declining school population is a much bigger problem than a growing school population. If we were to go to kindergarten, to all-day kindergarten, I think immediately, by the time we do the full transition, we're probably talking about 100 kids in kindergarten alone that aren't there now. And because it would make the district more attractive to people on the outside, it might cause a reversal in the flow of people coming into the district. So there it is.
I did notice that in the budget review that its academic capacity is listed, and specifically the implications of size and capacity. Is that a result of looking out? Is that
Has nothing to do with this. So nothing, to all due respect, but we know we do these enrollments for a wide variety of reasons. And one of the things that we also know is that there's a huge difference between what the number of kindergarten kids that come to us for kindergarten and the number of first grade kids that come to us as first graders. And so if you look, and I appreciate what Gary's saying, but the reality of it is, while the projections are based upon an artificial low of what the kindergarten pieces are, and you put an artificial low and run it through the system, it's going to be artificially low and multiply itself. If we were to do projections using first grade and run it through the system, you'll see our numbers flatline all the way across the board. And that's why actually one of the things I wrote myself a note to get a copy of the most recent cohort, because I actually do that myself. I drop all this in a spreadsheet and run all sorts of gyration using the cohort survivals to have some sense, and then we use actual enrollments, apply the survival ratio to them, and we see flatline across the board, and that's when we start to be able to identify what are the bubbles within the system and how does that impact staffing implication. So actually, I'm not sure if I would like to have the problem that you just proposed, Gary, because I'm not sure if the solution of a lottery is one that's going to be very popular. But I understand exactly what you're saying, and that's why we go through this study to see if the trend is seeing, because if remember, back in, I think, 08, 09, there was a big paranoia of, oh my God, we're going to be at 10, 11,000 kids. And people panicking, people internally otherwise, and we're like, no, it's not going to happen. Because we knew what the realities of our situation were, and we haven't gone to 10 to 11,000 kids in district. And so part of this information that we get from them is to get that and their calculation and then juxtapose that with the realities of what we see happening within the system right now. And so we think about those things in consideration. We take things in consideration such as what Sarah spoke about tonight, the influx of E&L kids coming into the district. And so we always have that piece that while we may not see the huge numbers of live births at kindergarten, we still see a lot of in-migration, or as I say, sufficient in-migration to moderate, if you will, and keep that kind of flat line projection. So from looking at this and from some other things that we've been looking at, and again, I would love to be able to tell you what 5 years is going to look like, but pretty good confidence for the next 2, maybe 3 years based upon actual enrollment pattern. We're probably more likely to be pretty flatline. And so that's the piece. Now, if we're at the next 2 or 3 years, we're starting to see realistically huge downturns because we were worried about it when we had those big bubbles going through the system. And I think the last big bubble right now is maybe the ninth grade class. The juniors are a big one too. That's going to be, but actually no, it is. Yeah, but fast forward.
Down, then goes back up.
So we see that piece of it, and so we see, okay, that creates some moderation, but then what's the backfill? And so every year we do the plus and minuses, and that's why we do period by period. Every period we have enrollments come out, and we try to see what the plus and minuses are and see where things are. So I think we're going to be fairly moderate over the next 3 years. Beyond that, I think my guess is as good as Josh's. And so looking at this, I see this as, okay, I know what are the factors that are skewing it. So the question is, if I take the skew factor out of it, what does that look like? And if I take the skew factor out of it and roll our enrollment zone, which we're in the process of doing right now, what does that look like? Take the skew factor out and look at our census that we do for our preschool census data and what parents we say have an interest in, what parents tell us that no, we won't come back for till 3rd grade because we're sending our kids to full day K, that we want them to stay there for 1 or 2 years. And so we take all those things into consideration to try to see that piece of it. So flatline is probably the best word I would describe, Gary, from a practical planning process, which going out beyond 2 years I think would be tough. And we're still watching the housing. That's why we watch the housing developments, and more we're seeing housing developments coming up. And the piece that's surprising about that is for the number of housing developments in relationship to the population. That's the piece that. But then again, we also see the it's a trend, and it's people, 1, having kids later, 2, or having less kids. So the combination of the 2 things lend to people buying large houses in neighborhoods and having one. I'm a perfect example. Live in a house that 3 bedrooms empty because 2 kids are gone.
And I think we've got an older population
bedrooms
that's
are
no
empty
longer
because
in
2 kids
child.
Yeah, we had a guest room.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So that's a point. It's a great point. So thank you, Josh, for that. Rich, kind goes in,
So the other thing I'd like to add, I promise I won't belabor this point, but there is opportunity. If you know the district's going down, and one thing I appreciated what Josh shared was showing that the last three analysis, they're all three ticking down. They're not ticking up, so.
exactly, so we know we're not seeing this huge thing we have to look out for versus some moderation over time.
So there is an opportunity. That was the only thing I wanted to add.
Vanessa and Kelly, just for future, when we save, can we save in the PowerPoint format or something? Because it's scrolling. So just want to share real quick with the board. And again, recognizing the late hour, and we'll be having this conversation many times over. So I'm not going to hit on all the points, but this is the part of the process where we start using this presentation internally with different groups to kind of set the tone and tempo for the year, for the budget year and the focus. And as you know, each year we have a theme. And if you use the words, different words, but it's still a very similar message, and I say a similar thing. So the big focus on this year is looking at this whole notion of again, making sure we have gone for years where we were talking about adding capacity to now is how do we really, we have some great capacity, we have some great situation, how do we really up the ante on the experience of our students and this whole notion of authentic learning piece of it. So that's what's driving the piece of it, and I'll go through those three words for a second. The board is very familiar with this. This is where we translate our mission statement into these 5 pillars that drive what we do programmatically or otherwise throughout the district. And those things then automatically drive our district, this is our fiscal goal from this past year and some of the objectives. So that's the backdrop. So in other words, the process is driven by these things. So it's not a popularity contest or what's the most recent thing, and that's why we're doing it versus fundamental, what are the things that are supporting our mission and goals as a school district. So this whole notion of authentic learning kind of comes from this whole notion that if we want to have a truly authentic experience where we're looking at the needs of kids, that, how do we look at that through an equity lens? And so we're looking at all sorts of data from an equity perspective. Who's included in the circle, and how do we keep pushing the circle out so we get people out of the periphery and into the middle, so to speak. So the whole notion of inclusive, this is a question that we pose to administrators and different folks, is what else can we do to make our school and classroom experience more relevant? That's the inclusive piece to our students from a diverse piece. How can we be more responsive to the emerging changes and cultural shifts that's taking place? And you heard some of that tonight, both from the backpack program as well as some of the things that Sarah spoke about. And then ultimately, we want to make sure that at the end of the day, that our education experience as an academic is a special experience for every kid. And so that's where we come back to the authentic learning piece. And so with that being said, then, that's kind of like our focus this year, is like, how do we really start doing those things well and try to stay away from a lot of the mandate conversation and a lot of the stuff that I think in past years we had to do to keep our system going. You've seen this before. Value add is a big piece of what we try to do every year. Anything we do in the budget is adding value to the organization, trying to be cost effective as much as we can, and we certainly keep it in implication. What's the tax implication and our ability to pay for the things that we're proposing. So mentioning the value add, academic capacity is one of those things we look at. So this information tonight from Josh, and as well as a lot of other analysis that we're doing, looking at enrollment, looking by the numbers, and then looking by the program, and looking by the needs of kids, and all those kind of things, and determining the capacity that we have in place. The equity and supports, how we really have in service following needs, what kind of specialization that we need to do, enhance as we move forward. Academic rigor, as we start looking at some of the state standards, instead of just looking at the standards as a mandate piece, how we use that to drive a wide variety of course options for kids. So rigor doesn't necessarily mean harder. Rigor meaning how do we have a wider variety of options for kids to make sure that the experience is, in fact, a relevant experience for them. Strategic repurposing, personnel management, a big part of what we have to do. The piece I want to point out to the board here is that probably in January or so, we'll start having some conversations surrounding CSC negotiations. And so we'll be in the midst of negotiations potentially while we're developing the budget, or we may resolve a negotiation midstream of a budget. So those are the kind of things that we have taken consideration as we move forward. Again, you're going to see a lot of this. So here's some things that we know that right now we have to be mindful of as we think about the 2020 budget. Health insurance. We're running a lot of numbers now. We know numbers coming in for January, and January numbers will last us till next July, so we have some sense of that. We anticipate that our health insurance should be flat, relatively flat, which is a great thing when you consider that everyone is dealing with increasing double-digit costs of health insurance. Kudos to Kathy Chase and some of the work she's been doing with some folks to do that. We know that potential the retirement pension costs, TRS, teacher retirement system, will go up. We already have some sense of that. We get some data on that piece of it. However, the board approved that the reserve, so we use that to mitigate the impact. So again, because that increase is not going to prevent us from doing some other things budgetary, so we try to mitigate that piece of it. And I mentioned negotiations. There's a lot of shifting standards coming down the state. We're going to really try to capitalize on those things. So we're already doing that, quite frankly, to enhance how we look at science. If you recall the presentation by Dr. Wood several weeks back about the new science kits at the elementary level, that's a perfect example of how we're looking at those standards and changing fundamentally how we teach certain subjects and what resources we use to do so. Equity and outcomes is always going to drive what we do. Here, AIS and ENL is those two areas that we're really going to hone in on, and you heard some of the conversations tonight from Sarah Chaffee. Special education is a constant piece for us, a constant piece, making sure that not only the kids graduating, but as you heard from tonight, that we're giving kids experiences, so when they leave Shen, they have not only potential career experiences, but also academic credentials to go to the next level. Enrollment implications, we already spoke about that. The mental health and wellness piece is always a big piece of it. The big piece we're going to try to shift some focus in is how do we start, again, restorative justice is almost kind of coming like a brand name, and we don't want to do the brand name thing versus trying to fundamentally look at how we look at student discipline, how we look at student supports, and how we look at some of those kind of things, and not doing the newest package program that comes because as they come, they go, versus fundamentally looking at our practices, our protocols within our system. And a lot of that work is already happening, and so if you recall, we've invested in different staff over the course of the past several years to keep looking at that piece of it. College and careers, Rose Barr is working on a lot of articulation agreements, and I mentioned last week that we got approval for four articulation agreements, so it's going to be pretty excited to have those things moving forward. Working on a health, not a health course, but a medical health course that we'll be at some point bringing back to the board through the IPAC process, so we're pretty excited about those kind of things. And then these are some constant going pieces, the engaged classroom, constant going, safety, constant going, and we're always looking at administrative capacity, not necessarily adding people, but as we look at, we brought in 4, 5, 6 new administrators this year. Things are changing. People are transitioning through their career, and we need to be able to anticipate that, so we have a smooth transition as we see people change careers, going from looking for the runway to take off to look for the runway to land. So we're looking at those kind of things. So essentially, that's the initial thinking behind the budget. It's not going to be a very complicated in terms of many moving parts. It's really going to focus on trying to refine the things that we're doing and looking at it from an equity lens in terms of are we providing quality experience for all kids, and really looking at those kind of things and seeing where we're missing the mark, where we're missing the gap, how do we better support kids in a very holistic sense of it. So that's so the board knows that as we get into the process, that's what we're looking to bring forward, and this will unfold quite a bit over the next month and a half.
Any questions?
Thank you.
Okay, so can we go to action items?
Yes, so we just have one contract that we have to, time-sensitive contract, asking the board if they could act on it.
Okay, I think most board members have had a chance to look at this contract. Can I have a motion from this, Mr. Gilbert, second, Mrs. Stevenson? Any comments or questions on this contract? If not, all in favor? Okay. And at this point, I think we're ready to adjourn. Can I have a motion on adjournment? Mrs. Hoffman, second, Mrs. Miller. Any comments or questions? If not, all in favor? Okay.
Thanks, Josh. Appreciate it. Thank you. Josh, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.